A message arrives at 9 in the evening. The wording is mild. Hop on a quick call when you get a second. Nothing major. She joins. His voice is warm, almost friendly. He asks how the kids are. Then, in the same breath, he mentions he noticed her replies in the client channel slowed last week, that he assumes things are fine at home, and that he would hate for the review to reflect something temporary. He closes by saying he is only telling her this because he looks out for his people in a way most managers never bother to. In 90 seconds, he has done 3 things at once. He showed her she is being watched in a channel she did not know was monitored. He tied that watching to her performance review with nothing specific enough for her to argue against, and he dressed the whole threat as care, which turns her fear into gratitude. He never has to say the words, "I can hurt you." He only has to make her grateful that he warned her before he did. That is the entire video in one phone call. Toxic supervisors are not mainly managing work. They are managing fear, visibility, and your loyalty. And the goal underneath all 3 is simpler and uglier than bad management. A toxic supervisor does not want better work from you. He wants a smaller version of you. Someone afraid to act, afraid to rest, afraid to be unseen, and grateful for scraps of approval. The next couple of minutes break down exactly how that gets done. Start with what toxic actually means, because the word has been used so much it has stopped meaning anything. A supervisor is not toxic because of personality or mood. A supervisor is toxic because of function. The defining feature is a pattern that pulls value out of the people below him while pushing the cost of that extraction down onto them. You do not need to diagnose anyone to see it. You do not need a label or a disorder. The pattern is the evidence, and the pattern is consistent. Credit travels up, blame travels down. Information gets hoarded and released only when it is useful to him. Warmth appears only when it buys something. Watch where those 4 things move in a workplace, and you can identify a toxic supervisor without ever guessing at what is going on inside his head. This has to be separated from strict leadership, because toxic supervisors survive on the confusion between the two. A strict manager gives you a standard. A toxic one tells you that you should already know what he expects, then punishes you for guessing wrong. A strict manager corrects the work. A toxic one turns the mistake into a statement about your character. A strict manager documents fairly in the same way for everyone. A toxic one opens a file on you only when he needs a weapon. Strict leadership produces clarity, and the rules apply to everyone, including the boss. Toxic leadership produces uncertainty, where the rules move with his mood, and the accountability only ever runs in one direction. What sits underneath this is usually not strength. It is the opposite. A lot of toxic supervisors are not secure in their own competence, so they manufacture security out of other people's fear. They cannot feel in control through what they actually do, so they take control of how the people around them feel instead. And the scale of this is not small. Recent survey data from the Harris poll puts it at roughly 6 in 10 American workers reporting a boss who shows toxic behaviors, with about 47% saying that boss is actively damaging their mental health. This is not a rare problem at the edge of the working world. It is closer to the default. Fear is the foundation, and the effective version of it is almost never shouting. Shouting is amateur. It is loud, it leaves evidence, and it gives the target something clean to react to. The skilled toxic supervisor works in suggestion. He does not need to yell. He just needs you wondering whether your name came up in a meeting you were not invited to. Listen to the actual language and you will recognize every line. Your name came up. People are starting to notice. I'm trying to protect you here. This might affect how leadership sees you. I'd hate for this to become a pattern. Let's not make this bigger than it needs to be. None of those are accusations. Not one of them can be answered because there is nothing specific in any of them. They exist to install a low, constant hum of dread and then leave you alone with it, because the punishment you invent for yourself is always worse than anything he would put in writing. He keeps you off balance by staying unpredictable. The same report gets praised on Monday and treated with contempt on Thursday. The same mistake is waved off once and treated as a character flaw the next time. You cannot find the rule, so you stay braced all the time. And a person who stays braced all the time is a person who has already been trained. There is a reason the occasional warm moment makes this worse instead of better. Reward that arrives at random, mixed with punishment that arrives at random, builds a stronger grip than steady treatment of either kind. It is the same thing that keeps people feeding a slot machine. The rare good day from a boss you fear does not loosen the fear. It deepens your need for the next good day. Two more things drive it. The first is that he punishes in public and praises in private, when he praises at all. The correction that should have been a private word happens in front of the room, because the humiliation teaches everyone watching, not just you. The praise that should be on the record gets handed to you alone, off the record, so it never becomes something you can hold on to and count on. The second is the part that confuses good employees the most. The better you perform, the tighter the control gets. A supervisor who is privately unsure of his own value experiences a strong performer as a threat, so your competence does not earn you safety. It earns you more scrutiny. And once people understand they might be watched at any moment, they stop needing to be watched at all. They police themselves. They manage their own tone, their own hours, their own face, bracing for an inspection that may not even be happening. He gets obedience for free, distance that protects his ego, and a team too anxious to push back. The work was never the point. The smaller employee was the point. You have probably sat in the meeting where it lands. You walk into the review expecting the project you delivered to be the subject. Instead, he opens with a vague concern about your communication, something nobody mentioned to you while there was still time to fix it. He has examples, 3 of them, all small, all months old, none of them raised at the time. The point is not the examples. The point is that he was keeping them. You realize, sitting there, that everything you thought was a normal working relationship was being filed the whole time, and that the file only ever opens against you. Fear is what you feel. Surveillance is what he builds, and he builds it out of ordinary workplace tools so that it looks like diligence instead of control. You know the modern version because you live inside it. The green dot on Slack, the status light on Teams, the timestamp on your last reply, the gap in your calendar he asks about, the quick sync that has no agenda and exists only to prove he can summon you, the message that lands 5 minutes after you go offline, just to see whether you answer, the casual question to a coworker, "Have you heard from her today?" dressed as concern, but working as intelligence gathering, the open door policy that is not access at all, but a collection point, where grievances and alliances in weak spots get gathered and saved for later. And here's the part that gives it away. None of it makes the work better. Real performance management does not need this volume of watching, and the watching does not improve a single deliverable. It exists to give him the feeling of control and to stop you from doing good work out of his sight, because work that runs fine without him is the thing he is actually afraid of. Independent, competent people are evidence that he is not needed, so independence is what the surveillance is built to kill. You know the feeling, even if you have never named it. You reread a normal message 5 times before you send it. You add an exclamation mark so you do not come across as cold. You answer after hours, not because anything is urgent, but because being unreachable feels dangerous. That is the second job nobody put in your contract. You are doing your actual work, and on top of it, you are doing the full-time work of managing how that work looks to a man scanning for fault. The energy that should go into the job goes into the performance of the job instead. It mirrors the logic of coercive control, the pattern documented in controlling personal relationships, constant monitoring, restricted independence, and the steady wearing down of your own judgment until you stop trusting it. The context is different and the comparison should not be pushed too far, but the control logic is disturbingly similar. The controlling partner does not need to be in the room to run your behavior, because you carry the surveillance inside you and adjust to it on your own. The monitored employee does the same. The boss logs off and his attention stays behind, still running, governing what you write and when you let yourself rest. And it feeds straight back into fear, because the more closely you are watched, the more reasons you invent to be afraid of the moments you are not. The watching breeds the dread. The dread justifies more watching. He never has to lift a hand. This is the worst layer, because it does not look like control at all. It looks like a relationship. It looks like mentorship. Sometimes it looks like the best professional connection you have ever had, and that is exactly what makes it work. It starts with rationed warmth. The boss who is cold or threatening most of the time hands you, every so often, a moment of real seeming approval. He tells you you are one of his favorites. He says he sees something in you. He confides something, lets you feel chosen, separate from the others, closer to him than they are. Then he makes that closeness expensive. He calls you a favorite and turns the favoritism into a debt. He says he is investing in you, and what he means is that he expects to be repaid in silence and extra hours. He reminds you he has always protected you, right before he asks for something you would otherwise refuse. The tools are guilt and crisis. After everything I have done for you, don't make me regret trusting you. I thought you were more committed than this. There is always an emergency that needs your weekend, always a personal appeal that turns a reasonable no into a betrayal. The things you told him in a moment of trust, the health problem, the strain at home, the ambition you admitted out loud, come back later as leverage, used at the exact moment you need flexibility or try to push back. He performs intimacy while keeping all the power, and that can never be a real relationship, because one of you controls the other's income and the other controls nothing. The pattern resembles trauma bonding, and it is worth being precise about why rather than just dropping the term. The same ingredients are present: threat, unpredictable relief, and attachment to the one person who controls both the pain and the approval. The fear keeps your system switched on. The rare kindness becomes valuable exactly because it is rare and you cannot predict it, and you bond to the source of both at once. It works by exploiting two ordinary human needs, the need to know what is coming and the need to be recognized, by rationing both and making himself the only supplier of either. It hunts the conscientious first. The hard worker, the person who needs to do right by their team, is the most exploitable because their conscientiousness is the handle he grabs. They absorb more, excuse more, and stay longer, telling themselves his treatment of them is a problem they can fix with more effort. The cruelty of it is that the qualities he feeds on are their best ones: their reliability, their loyalty, their sense of responsibility. All of it gets turned into the machinery of their own use, which is why the most committed person in the room is so often the most hollowed out by the end. What he takes is enormous, and what he returns is almost nothing he can ever be held to. He gets a team to absorb his moods, loyalty performed back at him on command, free hours pulled out of guilt. You end up with a third job stacked on the first two, managing his ego and his feelings and his reputation, none of it written down anywhere, all of it required to survive. These are not three separate bad habits that happen to live in one unpleasant man. They are one system, and the order it moves in is what makes it so hard to escape. First, he makes you afraid. Then he makes you visible, so the fear has somewhere to point. Then he makes you emotionally indebted, so you cannot bring yourself to fight back. Then, somewhere in there, he gets you doubting your own judgment, so you stop trusting the part of you that knows something is wrong. And then the organization rewards him for all of it, because from the outside, the team looks responsive and loyal and busy. Each piece feeds the others. The fear makes the watching feel normal, just the price of a serious job. The watching produces the raw material, the timestamps and the overheard comments and the private things you let slip that get turned into sharper fear and better leverage. The manufactured loyalty stops you from naming any of it, because naming it feels like betraying someone who, you have been led to believe, cares about you. And the system defends itself the moment you try to describe it. Call out the fear and you are too sensitive. Call out the watching and you must have something to hide. Call out the exploitation and you are ungrateful and not a team player. The act of naming the abuse gets turned into proof of your bad attitude, which then justifies more of all three aimed at the person who dared to speak. That is why it feels like a trap. Every exit is wired to trigger the thing you are trying to get away from, and the organization usually protects him, not on purpose, but because of what it can and cannot see. He produces fast compliance and a lot of visible motion, and both of those read upward as competence. The team replies quickly, the dashboards stay green, he looks decisive and in command. The damage runs on a slower clock and through channels nobody is measuring. Turnover, burnout, the capable people who leave, the ideas that never get raised because raising them is not safe. All of it is spread out, delayed, and almost impossible to pin on one manager. Control is immediate and easy to see. Damage is gradual and easy to deny. So companies promote and shield the people who generate fear-based compliance, because fear-based compliance photographs as strong leadership. Here's what they are actually buying. The organization thinks it has a high-performing manager because the team looks responsive. What it really has is a department spending half its intelligence avoiding punishment instead of doing the work. And the people taking the most damage are usually the ones with the least power to be heard about it. The junior, the new, the financially trapped, the ones with no relationship above his head. The system aims its cost at exactly the people least able to make those costs land anywhere, which is how it runs for years before anyone upstairs decides to call it a problem. The damage is not abstract, and it does not stay at the office. Living under a constant low threat keeps the body's alarm system switched on, and a body is not built to run its alarm without stopping. What follows is the documented territory of chronic stress, wrecked sleep, strain on the heart, a weaker immune response, the gut and the weight and the mood all paying the bill. The health effects of long exposure to an abusive boss are real and measured, not a figure of speech. The mind erodes alongside the body. Self-trust goes first. When your read on events is overridden and rewritten for long enough, you stop believing your own perception. Then your sense of yourself as good at your job goes, because people who arrived capable start to experience themselves as the problem. And there is a final cost no company ever puts on a report: the slow loss of what people are actually able to do. They stop bringing their full intelligence to the work, not because they ran out of it, but because using it stopped being safe. The best of what they could have built never gets built, and nobody above the supervisor ever sees the thing that was never there. The most useful thing you can do is name it, because the whole system depends on staying unnamed. Once you can describe the behaviors plainly, they stop looking like your personal failure or your bad luck and start looking like what they are, which is a method. This was never about a confused man who needs a better explanation of his impact. He is not lost, he is benefiting. The fear, the watching, the rationed care, all of it works for him because it pulls loyalty and effort and silence out of you while pushing every real cost onto your side of the ledger. He does not want better work. He wants a smaller employee, and he wants you grateful while he makes you one. Name the system out loud and you take away the one thing it cannot survive without, which is your belief that it is anything other than a system. He was never managing you. He was training you to fear him and calling that fear professionalism.